I'm telling you, you're wasted here. Join my private military and I'll make you the face of elite global security.
What would happen if a former US president treated a royal guard like a personal bodyguard? What if he tried to turn ceremony into performance and found out, too late, that some uniforms aren't for hire? This story takes place at Windsor Castle, during a private visit that didn't go quite as planned. But before we reveal what really happened, the look that silenced a billionaire, the moment that stopped a crowd mid-laugh, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing just how far these stories reach. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The morning air over Windsor Castle held that curious blend of ceremony and strain. Clear skies above, clipped footfalls on gravel below, and the sense that something was about to happen that wasn't on the official itinerary. Corporal James Redley stood at his post near the southern forecourt, rifle cradled with immaculate stillness against his shoulder, tall black bearskin hat rising above the crowd like a sentinel from another era. His red tunic caught the morning light just so, its brass buttons glinting, with the kind of pride that couldn't be polished into cloth, but had to be worn into the man himself. The American entourage had arrived precisely 7 minutes behind schedule, their vehicles rolling up in a mechanical procession of matte black SUVs that didn't so much park as claim space. Out stepped Donald J. Trump, former President of the United States, business mogul, golf course titan, and currently unofficial architect of a proposed private security task force that had already drawn enough controversy to make half the palace staff quietly nervous. He emerged with a practiced grin, flanked by a small ocean of security personnel in matching suits and Bluetooth earpieces. A few had the hardened look of private contractors, arms like tree trunks beneath tight jackets, eyes scanning everything but seeing nothing of value. Trump gave the assembled crowd a broad wave and started toward the rope line separating the tourists from the ceremonial post. "Well now, look at this guy," he bellowed, pointing a tanned finger toward Redley. "Now that is what I'm talking about. You can't buy that kind of presence unless maybe you're me." Laughter rippled through his entourage. Several cameras rose. A few tourists chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh along or step back. The British liaison officer posted for the event, young, pale, and clearly out of his depth, shifted uneasily from foot to foot. Trump strode closer to the barrier, eyes fixed on Redley. "You, soldier, what's your name? You talk, or are you just decoration?" Redley didn't flinch. His breath stayed invisible, perfectly timed, eyes fixed ahead. Trump turned to his team. "Now that is discipline. Look at this guy. He's like a wax figure with a heartbeat. I want him. Let's borrow him, all right?" An aide laughed obligingly. "You mean for the task force pitch, sir?" "Exactly." Trump grinned. "Let's get a British guard in the mix. Optics, people, prestige. You stand this guy next to the rest. It's a win on sight." Another aide, shorter, clipboard in hand, whispered something urgently. Trump waved him off. "Don't worry about protocol. We're just admiring. That's legal, right?" He turned back toward Redley. "Tell me, soldier, do you know how to salute a real commander-in-chief?" The crowd grew quiet. A little boy tugged on his dad's sleeve. "Is he allowed to talk to him like that?" The father just shook his head slowly, eyes never leaving the scene. Redley stayed motionless, still as a photograph, still as the granite beneath his boots. One of Trump's private contractors, square jaw, mirrored sunglasses, body like a vending machine, leaned over to the rope. "What do you think he benches?" "Bet I've got him by 2 stone. The former president laughed. "Come on, he's got height, but I doubt he's done a push-up since boot camp." Still, Redley didn't move. Back near the entry arch, Sergeant Ellen Partridge watched it all unfold. She stood half in shadow, arms folded behind her back. She'd seen worse. Drunk aristocrats at charity galas, tourists flinging coins to get a guard to blink, even a stag party dressed as a choir trying to sing "God Save the Queen" off-key at a Christmas post. But this felt different, not just disrespectful. intentional, Trump motioned for one of his aides. "Get me a proper photo. Let's get me next to him. Put it on the site. Trump and the royal elite." "That's good branding." The aide hesitated. "Sir, I don't believe we're allowed to cross." Trump was already walking toward the barrier. "It's my event. What are they going to do? Arrest me for admiring?" The palace liaison stepped forward in a panic, offering the practiced line. "Sir, ceremonial personnel are not available for direct engagement. We ask that you refrain from—" "Relax," Trump grinned. "I'm not stealing him." At that, several chuckles rolled through his circle. But none from the tourists. The laughter had shifted, grown thinner. A few stepped backward. One woman, American by her accent, lowered her phone and whispered something to her teenage daughter, and still, Redley stood like iron set in cloth. No reaction, no eye movement. The kind of posture that only comes from surviving things too serious for words. Trump folded his arms, appraising. "Bet he's not even listening. Might be just empty under that bearskin. You think he's real?" Someone behind the rope said quietly, "Realer than you." It wasn't clear who said it, but Trump heard it. Everyone did. He looked up sharply, scanning faces. The mood had changed. The moment had shifted. And in the dead centre of it all stood a royal guard who hadn't moved a muscle, but had somehow drawn every ounce of gravity into himself. Partridge stepped from the arch, not hurrying, not flustered, just coming forward like a shadow that had waited long enough. Trump didn't notice her yet. He was too busy trying to gauge the crowd, but she saw everything, especially Redley. His grip had tightened, only slightly, but for her that was enough. She knew what that meant. She knew this moment wasn't over. It was just beginning. Redley had always found it easier to stand still than to speak. That wasn't some poetic metaphor. It was simply how his body had been retrained. After the explosion in Helmand, after the surgery, after the long blank months in the rehab ward, watching his own leg disappear beneath bandages and metal scaffolding, stillness became his only constant. They told him he'd walk again. Then they said he might march again. Then one doctor, well-meaning but blunt, told him the ceremonial post was out of the question. "That's not combat ready. That's presentation-level precision," the man had said. "It's not a place for compromise." Redley hadn't argued. He'd simply nodded, and when the time came, he passed every test anyway. The Irish Guards took him back because he didn't ask for special treatment. He just asked for the right to try. And try he did. Every drill, every inspection, every hour, balancing his weight between the prosthetic and the real leg until even the instructors forgot which one was metal. Now he was here. On the stones of Windsor, in front of cameras and tourists, and one very loud former President of the United States, holding ceremonial stillness in 32-degree heat like it was second nature. But it wasn't nature. It was discipline. Learned, earned, practiced. His father would have approved. John Redley had worn the same uniform during the Falklands era. Though he'd only served ceremonial after injury, ended his short career in the field. James used to stare at the photo hung in their hallway. His father in the same red tunic, standing at ease at the funeral of Lord Mountbatten, jaw like a chisel, white gloves glowing against polished brass. "That's not theatre," John used to say. "That's the last line of respect between the old world and the new chaos." And James had never forgotten it. Now, decades later, Redley's ceremonial post was more than a job. It was a vow, a quiet daily promise that someone was still holding the line, without shouting, without needing attention, without demanding thanks. Trump didn't know any of that. How could he? To him, the red tunic was fabric. The bearskin was novelty, and the guard beneath it was a good prop for whatever fantasy army he was building in his head. But Redley had served, not just stood, served. He remembered the first patrol outside Sangjin, how the sun in Helmand hit different, like it meant to flay the skin straight off you. He remembered the roadblock, the roadside blur, the child's bicycle in the ditch. He remembered the blast, the white silence, the screaming that wasn't his. He'd lost a friend that day. A quiet corporal named Sutton, who wrote poetry in his rations notebook and never once raised his voice. Sutton had died 5 feet away. Redley had survived, but barely. And now he stood in the shadow of a palace wall, while a man who had never worn the weight of duty tried to turn that pain into pageantry. One of the contractors chuckled again, loud enough to be heard, just soft enough to pretend it was private. "You think he'd last 10 seconds in a real fight," he muttered to another. "Bet he's got hollow legs under that uniform." Redley's right hand tightened around the rifle stock. Barely. The subtle shift of tension that only someone trained to spot it would even notice. Sergeant Partridge noticed. From her post by the arch, she didn't move, but her focus narrowed. She had trained Redley, had watched him march through pain like it was fog, had seen the X-rays and the battlefield evaluations and the quiet way he handled ignorance without needing to correct it. But everyone had limits, and that comment, that was a crack in the wall. A few feet away, tourists were watching more intently now. Not just filming, observing. The jokes were no longer funny. The contractors' voices felt misplaced. The atmosphere had turned dense, uncertain. One woman, standing just behind the front rope, lowered her phone entirely. She looked to be in her mid-60s, American by her voice. Sunglasses but no smile. She stared at Trump's group like someone who'd seen a few too many boys lost to men like this. She was holding a scarf, red, white and blue, with a tiny silver brooch pinned near the knot. The brooch bore 2 flags, the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes, intertwined. It wasn't for decoration, it meant something. And Redley, from the edge of his vision, caught the gleam of it. The heat pressed in harder now, sweat pooled along the small of his back beneath the wool. His shoulders ached. The bearskin's weight tugged at his neck. His right knee, not quite real, trembled once before he steadied it. Trump was laughing again. "Come on, you've got to admit, he'd look good next to my guys. Little makeover, little flag swap. We could brand it Elite Britain." Redley said nothing. But inside, something shifted. He didn't need to speak. He just needed to hold. It began with a joke that went just a step too far. "Let me through," Trump said, stepping closer to the rope line. "Let's get a proper photo, something viral. Me and the guard, 2 strong men, shoulder to shoulder. Maybe he can be the British branch of my task force." The palace liaison officer tried again, voice cracking slightly under pressure. "I must remind you that the ceremonial guard is not available for interaction or repositioning. They are an active military unit under strict protocol." Trump waved him off with a gesture that would have suited a casino floor. "Relax, relax. It's just admiration. Admiration is legal, right?" He stepped right up to the rope, ignoring the nervous glances of the tourists, many of whom had now lowered their phones, uncertain if they were watching a stunt or a standoff. "That's close enough, sir." The voice was calm, crisp and definitive. Sergeant Ellen Partridge had stepped forward. Her stride was slow, her presence quiet but unwavering. She wasn't bristling with authority. She carried it like a weight she had long ago learned to balance. Trump glanced at her and gave a crooked smile. "Now, don't get in a fuss. I'm not kidnapping your guy. We're just admiring. I like the look. Very clean. Maybe too clean. You polish him yourself?" No one laughed. Partridge came to a halt a few feet from the rope. "Sir, respectfully, I'm asking you to step back from the ceremonial perimeter." Trump's smile thinned. "Sweetheart, I've had world leaders stand closer than this. Why don't we skip the protocol and get a handshake? I'm very big on symbolism." There was a pause. The air seemed to compress. A sharp whisper came from his right, one of his security detail. "Sir, optics!" But Trump wasn't listening. He gestured again to the guard. "Tell him to march, would you? Just one turn. Show the people what they came to see." Partridge didn't blink. "Corporal Redley will remain at his post. You may stand down, sir." Trump chuckled, but it was hollow now. You guards really do take yourselves seriously." It was then that the man in sunglasses, Hover, the broad-chested contractor who had been smirking since the moment they arrived, took a half-step forward and loudly muttered, "What's the point of guarding the crown if you fold under a camera flash?" He didn't mean for everyone to hear it, but they did. That was the final crack, and someone filled the silence. "He hasn't folded," a voice said. "You have." It came from the older American woman in the front row, the one with the flag brooch and the scarf, tied like it had been through real winters. She stepped forward slightly, placing herself between the tourists and the spectacle unfolding in front of them. "My husband stood with the Royal Marines in '84, she said, her voice calm but carrying. "He trained with British forces, said the red tunic was the one uniform he'd salute without hesitation." Trump turned, amused. "Ma'am, I appreciate the patriotism, but we're just having a little fun." She ignored him, looked instead at Corporal Redley. "My husband died in Iraq, in uniform. He said there's a difference between men who wear rank and men who carry it." No one spoke. She pointed to Redley, who hadn't moved, not even blinked. "He's carrying something. You can feel it in your chest if you've ever stood beside real courage. And that man hasn't broken stillness, not because he can't, but because he chooses not to." Contractors had gone quiet. She held up her scarf and gently removed the silver brooch. Two flags side by side, twisted together like old roots. "I came here for a photograph, but I think I found something better. A reminder that real strength is silent when it must be, and unshakable when it needs to be." A tourist gasped softly. Others began to nod. Heads turned toward Redley, not with the expectation of reaction, but with the realization that they'd already seen one. Trump straightened, clearly uncomfortable for the first time all morning. He looked around at the crowd, now no longer chuckling. Phones were still recording, but they weren't angled for laughs anymore. Then something remarkable happened. The little boy from earlier, the one who had asked whether Trump was allowed to talk to the soldier, stepped forward from the rope line. His father tried to stop him, but the boy moved with the innocence of someone who didn't know he was interrupting anything at all. He stood just behind the rope, looked up at Redley and lifted his hand in a small, awkward salute. It wasn't textbook. Too high, elbow bent wrong, but it was earnest, and Redley moved just once. His eyes lowered, not much, not dramatically, just enough to meet the boy's gaze. That was all it took. The crowd exhaled as if they'd been holding their collective breath for the past 15 minutes. One woman wiped her eyes. A man in a wheelchair murmured, "Damn." And Trump? He looked around, measuring the mood, reading a room that had already turned the page without him. "We good here?" he said to no one in particular. Then he turned to go, but the moment stayed behind, hovering like smoke in the sunlight. Redley remained still. But the world had shifted around him. The sound of a car door closing wasn't loud, but it cut through the courtyard like a bell. Every head turned, tourists, staff, even Trump's entourage. A single black Jaguar had pulled up near the east access lane, escorted discreetly by two royal household vehicles. From it emerged a tall, silver-haired man in full regimental dress. The braid on his shoulders shimmered faintly in the sunlight. His pace was measured, his frame straight-backed, and though no one announced his name, those with eyes for such things recognized him instantly. General Sir Harold Tranter, former Chief of Defence Staff. Coldstream Guards by commission. Household Division Advisor Emeritus. A soldier's soldier. Revered by some, feared by others. A man who carried silence the way others carried swords. Trump, already mid-turn, paused. "Well now," he said, trying to recover some charm, "looks like the cavalry's arrived." Tranter didn't respond. He simply walked straight past the barrier, stopping 2 paces from Corporal Redley. He stood there for a moment, as if reading the space between them. Then he nodded once, subtle and precise. "Corporal." Redley's chin lifted the smallest degree. Not much, but enough. respect recognized in full stillness. Tranter turned toward the crowd, but not toward the cameras. His gaze moved across the people who had gathered, lingering on the American widow, on the boy who had saluted, and finally, deliberately, on Donald Trump. The general spoke without raising his voice. There are times when it is necessary to remind the public, particularly those not native to this soil, that these men do not stand here for decoration. Trump smiled thinly. "It's all right, General. We were just admiring the tradition. You were belittling it." The crowd stiffened. Trump's smirk faltered. "These men," Tranter continued, "do not stand for you. They do not stand for politics, for press, or for performance. They stand for something older than all of that. Older than you. Older than me." Trump held up a conciliatory hand. "We were being respectful." Tranter's voice cut clean through. "You do not approach a ceremonial guard uninvited. You do not request their movement. You do not joke about borrowing them for private service, because they are not yours." The contractor with the wraparound glasses shifted awkwardly. One of the aides looked like he wanted to disappear into the stonework. "And before your man here makes another comment about who could take whom in a fight," Tranter said without looking away, "he might consider what it means to stand motionless for hours in blistering heat, wearing a uniform not for show, but for the thousands who never came home to wear it again." There was no applause, no cheer, just silence. The kind of silence that happens when a room, or in this case a courtyard, remembers its place. The contractor mumbled something under his breath and stepped back behind the aides. Tranter's gaze softened slightly as he looked toward the American woman. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for what you said earlier. I believe your husband would have understood what this moment truly represents." She gave a small nod. Her hand clutched the brooch more tightly. Then Tranter turned to Redley once more. "You've held yourself impeccably, Corporal. The nation notices, even if some men do not." Redley gave no reply, but his breath had changed. Calm, but charged, the way air feels right before it rains. The general stepped back, returning to the line between duty and spectacle. Trump tried once more to inject levity. "No harm done, right?" "Beautiful tradition, really. I've always loved a good uniform." Tranter's reply was cold enough to freeze sunlight. "Then wear one." Trump's jaw tightened, but there was no comeback, because there was nothing left to say. A palace steward appeared at Trump's shoulder, soft-spoken, efficient. "Sir, the private tea reception has been moved forward. If you'll follow me." Trump turned, didn't look back. His entourage followed, quieter than they had arrived. Even the sunglasses had come off. The crowd didn't move for a long moment. They just stood, watching the empty space Trump had left behind, as if wondering how it had ever felt so loud. A light breeze drifted through the forecourt. Someone cleared their throat. A tourist near the back whispered, "That was something else." Then the small boy near the rope line saluted again, just once, and backed into his father's arms, and Redley blinked. That blink was everything. The forecourt emptied slowly, like the hush after a thunderclap. Tourists moved in silence now, whispering without meaning to. Even the usual end-of-tour chatter had faded into something softer. No more selfies against the scarlet uniforms, no more jokes. Just a kind of reverent withdrawal, like they'd all wandered into something sacred and were still unsure how to walk back out of it. Corporal James Redley remained at his post. The shift hadn't ended, and so he stood. The sun had moved several degrees across the sky since Trump's departure. The shadows were sharper now, the heat deeper inside the wool. Redley's shoulders ached, his right leg throbbing with the kind of dull fire he'd long ago made peace with. But he didn't sway, didn't fidget. He let the weight be weight. That was the job. From the edge of the courtyard, Sergeant Partridge reappeared. Her rotation had ended half an hour ago, but she hadn't gone far. She stood near the shade of the visitor's wing, arms folded, watching like a sentry on standby. When the bell finally rang for the ceremonial exchange, Redley turned on his heel with absolute precision. His boots struck the stone clean and firm. He moved with all the symmetry of a man built for ritual. No limp, no stagger, just form carried by will. As he passed the same little boy, still waiting quietly near the rope, Redley's gaze flicked downward just once. The boy beamed. His father caught it barely and whispered, "That means thank you." Redley disappeared into the inner archway. Inside the barracks, the light changed. Quieter, dustier. The scent of oiled leather and clean linen filled the corridor. He moved down the hallway to the dressing area, where another guard was already removing his gloves with care. Redley sat on the wooden bench beside his locker and slowly eased off the bearskin cap, setting it on the shelf with practiced grace. Then the tunic, then the gloves, folded into neat white squares. He exhaled slow and deep. The ache in his prosthetic leg had worsened. He could feel the edge of the strap digging into his thigh, but he made no sound. Pain was part of the posture. You didn't speak of it. You just stood through it. Tridge appeared in the doorway. He didn't look up. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Bit hot." She smirked faintly. "Still made him sweat more than you." Redley cracked the barest smile. "Didn't even blink." "You did. Twice. Only for the kid." She stepped inside and leaned against the wall. "General Trantor wanted to say something to you, but I told him to let you breathe." Redley nodded. "He already said enough." There was a pause between them. The kind of silence soldiers carry like gear. Not awkward, just shared. Then Partridge said, "You did the uniform proud today." "I didn't do anything." "Exactly." She left him there with that. Once alone again, Redley reached into the top shelf of his locker, pulled down a small wooden box, smooth from years of touch. Inside was a black and white photo of his father, standing in uniform just like him, same posture, same red. Beside it, folded neatly, was a handwritten note, faded and worn at the creases. He opened it. "Stillness is a form of speech. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His father's words, scribbled after a quiet ceremony, long before Afghanistan, long before the injury, long before Redley had even thought of himself as worthy of the red. He placed the photo on the shelf, upright this time, and beneath it he slid in a clipping someone had left on his bunk. An article, small, unsigned, posted to a local paper's blog that afternoon. "One man stood still today." In doing so, he reminded a former president, and perhaps the rest of us, what actual authority looks like. Redley didn't speak. Didn't need to. He closed the locker and left the room as neatly as he had entered. Outside, in the courtyard now returned to its usual rhythm. Tourists wandered in slower patterns. But near the rope line, a few lingered. One was the American widow. She had waited silently by the post. When she was sure the shift had ended, she stepped forward and laid her silver brooch at the base of the barrier, right beneath the spot where Redley had stood. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just pressed her palm gently to the railing and walked away. In her absence, a father leaned down to his son and whispered, "Do you remember what you said earlier about him being a statue?" The boy nodded. "You still think that?" The boy shook his head. "Statues don't look at you like that." Nearby, a palace steward who had witnessed 1,000 changing of the guard ceremonies. A man who had seen weddings, funerals, and 3 monarchs pass through the gates, quietly muttered to no one in particular, "That man didn't just hold the line today. He was the line." If you were in that courtyard, would you have spoken up or stayed silent out of respect? Do you think real strength still comes from quiet restraint, even when the world demands spectacle? And when someone treats ceremony like a joke, should tradition defend itself or simply hold the line? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and your thoughts matter more than you think. If this moment moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. We share Royal Guard stories like this every single day. Tap the bell so you never miss what happens next. And if you know someone who still thinks these guards are just for show, send them this video. Another powerful story's already on your screen. Click it now and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.